Well, in the Dialectic of Sex, published in 1970, the feminist activist and theorist Shulamit Firestone identifies technology as the possibility to subvert psychosexual domination. Firestone expectations about technology don't lay on the trust of the linearity of progress, but on a Marxian conception that situates technology within relations of power, in a historical moment in which sex and gender hierarchies are radically challenged by the feminist movement. According to Firestone, women's reappropriation of technological means of reproduction gained through the feminist struggle makes sexual difference in significance and sweeps away the conditions of existence of sexual domination. Conversely, radical feminists such as Gina Correa in the 80s conceptualized technology as an inherently masculine tool aimed at devaluating and commodifying women's bodies. The assumption of Firestone and Correa on bodies and technology are diametrically opposed. In fact, sexual difference is either emphasized or assumed as a social product and hence challenged. But it remains the pivot of our feminist reflections in the 70s and 80s on procreative and contraceptive techniques, which was also the main focus of feminist critique of and theory of technology. This aspect radically changes during the 80s, when the mass spread of information technology and the rise of post-structuralist theory led many feminist theories close to the currents of cyborg feminism and techno-feminism to recognize in the digital realm the condition of possibility for erasing bodily experience. Sherry Tarkle's Life on the Screen, published in 1995, becomes emblematic of a new experience of identity that in the World Wide Web can finally manifest itself in its fragmentation and multiplicity. Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto also moves from the premise of overcoming the sex, gender, nature, and culture dualism that constitutes the modern canon. However, Haraway's semiotics remains rooted in situated knowledges, and thus it is not indifferent to the hierarchical position that bodies occupy in what she calls the informatic of domination. The famous figure of the cyborg refers to the socially determined experience of women workers in former colonies who are integrated into a global capitalist circuit of factory, home, market mediated through technology in a very precise condition of subordination marked by capitalist exploitation. The shift from the informatics of domination of the 90s to what is being defined the current algorithmic society prompts a renewed interest and even a radicalization of theories of overcoming the body, associating algorithm and the digital to an automatized liberation. However, the algorithm is not simply a technical mathematical operation defined by input and output, but it is a process of categorization, organization, and profilization of data that fits into and impacts the social relations of power within which it is produced. Therefore, the question that arises is whether the algorithmic taxonomy enables a dematerialization of the body or produce an algorithmic implementation of sex and gender hierarchies. I will confront this question through the reading of Legacy Russell's Glitch Feminism, which is one of the most interesting examples of the dissolvement of the body within the digital. Thereafter, I will examine this perspective through the social and political studies on algorithms to understand what is the relationship between a liberating digital space and the algorithmic process. Finally, I will examine Russell's theory using the lens proposed by Pierre Bourdieu in Masculine Domination and Alenka Zupancic in Contradictions That Matter. The ambition of this paper is to highlight how a feminist theory of techno-social relations must necessarily confront the social meaning attributed to the body and how this social meaning is translated into the algorithm. This is important in order to grasp from a materialist perspective which are the possibilities that a feminist critique of technology can open. So, starting from her experience as a Black queer from New York's East Village, Legacy Russell conceives the digital as a space of emancipation and liberation from the limits of the body. The unlimited possibilities of the body, which Russell describes using the expression of cosmic body, are continually circumscribed by cultural representation, whose function is to make the body intelligible according to the binary norm. Gender is described as an abstract, aggressive, and contingent construction. Gender is also a technology, that is to say, a discursive artifice that formalizes behavior through the performative repetition of the norm. From the very first pages, it is evident the influence played by Judith Butler, for whom sexual difference is merely a prediscursive support that justifies the norm. Gender is not only the cultural conformation of sex, according to this theory, but it is rather the discursive apparatus by means of which sex, which in the word of Butler has always been gender, establishes itself. In the end, attacking the reiteration of binarism implies asserting the indifference of the body, which itself in these theories is nothing more than a neutral surface. Russell radically applies Butler's theory to the digital, reinterpreting Simone de Beauvoir's phrase, "one is not born, but rather becomes a woman," in "one is not born, but rather becomes a body." Russell argues that within the digital reality, the body challenges the binary performance, and hence it transcends its limits. Russell's definition of gender makes clear an analogy between gender and the algorithm. A bug in the system interrupts the speed and synchrony necessary for the capitalist implementation of the algorithm, as in the same way a glitch or an error or technical malfunction jams the formalized rules of gender, leaving the body uncovered from the prescription, and in this way it enables the liberation of the body. According to Russell, if capitalist and heteronormative society claims to define identity, then the digital is a middle space in which individuals can reject gender, self-define themselves, and embrace fluid and multiple corporalities. If the body and sexual positions play no role, the polemic battleground is hence an impersonal discursive power that pervades society and attaches the norm in a homogeneous way to all the subjects. To challenge this norm, Russell argues that Russell actually makes extensive use of artistic work and aesthetic behaviors. For example, the prosthetic body accesses the body as it is experienced in the reality and points out the gender as a construct. This process, according to Russell, is accompanied by the creation of virtual communities in which individuals can freely display their vulnerabilities, showing the failure of repetition, to use Butler's expression, and then refusing the system. Moreover, the glitch renders individual uncategorizable in phase of data categorization, impeding the functioning of the capitalist algorithm. We see, therefore, how glitch for its very existence is a refusal and a struggle against the system for Legacy Russell. Russell theory allows us to think at the possibilities that are open up in the digital. Quoting Russell, the digital makes new worlds and dare to modify our own. Against capital exploitation of gender norm, glitch freedom produces an abstraction of the body. The question, however, is now to examine this dematerialization of the body through algorithmic process and the social code that algorithmic process embodies. Looking at what is increasingly being called an algorithmic society, I think that two body-related phenomena emerge most prominently. On one side, the intensification of biometrics that aspires to establish connection between physical traits and social features. On the other side, the process of constant datification, which takes place in the software and apps that on a daily basis we use for hobby, at work, in the security sector, and in public administration. The collection and categorization of data ensures the automatization of more or less complex actions, and most of all, the profiling of users, which allows the personalization prediction of contents. This is to say the definition of individuals on the basis of precise characteristics and behaviors that are gradually associated with each other by data correlation. Prevision is recognized as a pivotal element of algorithmic power, and it requires standard codes that produce personalization of context. As pointed out by feminist theory, this process can produce discrimination, or what have been called algorithm of oppressions. On one side, many scholars have examined how sexist and racist representation are reproduced in the digital. On the other, the absence of data or the collection of partial data reproduce the invisibilization of certain categories that are completely excluded from data collection and the subsequent work on data. Contrary to what Russell claims, deflecting personalization is not easy. In fact, in phase of interruption of prescribed features or behavior, instead of interruption of prescribed features or behavior, categorization does not render intelligible, but produce incorrect and partial categorization. So the impression is that algorithm intensifies social hierarchies that does not emerge in the digital, but are reproduced and somehow even intensified within it. This is the reason why Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein propose a data feminist intervention, namely the formulation of a protocol to include minorities and encourage proper algorithmic representation. If an algorithmic society for Klein and if in the algorithmic society for Klein and D'Ignazio, what is counted counts, then data feminism promotes the inclusion of categories considered vulnerable through the proliferation of new algorithmic categories, hence identities. Without doubting that this may produce an improvement, it is important to reflect from a political and theoretical point of view what are the political implications of fixing in standardized categories conditions of social oppression, and if this really constitutes the possibility for overturning an algorithmic process of through a formal inclusion, but also a neutralization of these conditions. So having analyzed the process of formulating algorithmic codes, it is useful to turn our gaze to the formalization of the social and the gendered codes that the algorithm incorporates. In Masculine Domination, Pierre Bourdieu examines the naturalization of domination. The meanings inscribed within the bodies do not make them insignificant, but produce position of sovereign subordination between those who dominate and those who are dominated, in most of the cases, women. Those meanings are not contained in the body, but they are socially produced. In fact, not only every feature of the body is perceived and categorized hierarchically through the socially constructed poles of male and female. But there is, according to Bourdieu, a symbolization of reality that classifies the world according to this taxonomy, which is, taxonomy is a word that Bourdieu uses and that brings in mind the algorithmic taxonomy that we have already met. The ceaseless work of the sexual symbolization constitutes a social code or a social program, which is also an algorithmic term, that organizes experience and enables the automatic reproduction of domination as it was natural. So what appears as an objective perception of the world and of the social relation given within it is justified through a sexual difference that it is itself a social product, although naturalized. If we follow Pierre Bourdieu's critique, we see that the social program gets inscribed into bodies, attaching them precise position rather than easy, motival or fluid roles. This framework requires to ask if it is possible in the end to get rid of bodies and whether performative acts of nominalism or self-definition are sufficient to avoid this symbolic and material succession within the algorithm. In order to criticize this process of domination, Alenka Zupancic questions the political and therefore questions the political and conflictual character of sexual difference and sexuality. In what she defines as an ontological problem of sexual difference makes the latter not an element of identity, but the effect of the continuous operation of the symbolic. This operation of the symbolic produces contradiction, impossibilities, or what she calls a stumbling block of reality. Zupancic proposed, Zupancic's feminism, let's say, stands in continuity with Marxian theory in asserting a partiality, or to use Spivak's expression of strategic essentialism. This partiality originates in the politicization of a defined social position and produces an antagonism within an apparently homogeneous political space. If, quoting Zupancic, feminism does not originate when it poses the problem of otherness, but when it points out that half of the population does not exist politically, the point is to continually assert this partial condition as an element of rupture within the political space, a political space that, as we have seen, conceals the asymmetrical condition and the relations of power. This means that one cannot criticize the algorithm without criticizing the society that produces and the way in which men and women and subjectivities are situated within it. The digital, in the same way, cannot constitute itself a transformation without considering the way gender relations structure the real and how they are continually translated within the algorithm. Yes. Furthermore, these contradictions are required to be confronted. Zupancic highlights the need to confront and critique asymmetrical positions and the social meaning attributed to sex. And therefore, it is useful, I think, to apply Zupancic to the algorithm to figure out whether the inclusion of categories by itself, as proposed in data feminism, can produce the possibility to fight this contradiction, or it is rather a way to formally include these contradictions without challenging the conditions that make it to exist. We should ask ourselves whether the algorithm categorization of multiple identities affects and erases sexuation, or if, rooted in the symbolic plane, sexuation continues to operate even in front of multiple non-binary identities within the algorithm. To explain this point, it is useful to use an example that Russell makes herself. Facebook platform multiplies the categories of gender that one can choose within the platform. However, the data are in any case categorized and sold by Facebook using the binary norm. If we look at how sexuation acts to determine access and use of the digital, we see how the incorporation of social code into the algorithm make the body matter. And this happens every time when the algorithm is programmed to discard a woman CV, to associate stereotypically imaged linked to care work to Eastern Europe women on Google Image, or to associate Black and migrant women to racist and misogynist representation. It also happens every time that an algorithm tries to make a connection between sexual orientation and facial recognition. This raises also question about what concerns in which position women have access to the digital. And such materialist perspective, I think, allows to challenge avant-garde transformation and aesthetic transformation as it is conceived by Russell, in the way it obliges us to face the material experience that women every day experience in the technology. To conclude, recognizing this difference does not imply to fix them, but to highlight the condition in which feminist theory of technology must take sides, to use Supancic's words. It is necessary then to ask ourselves whether the virtual communities composed of abstract body can be the instrument of the feminist critique of technology. These communities can make feel us protected, but they decline any possibility of addressing this contradiction in the social fabric in which they are constituted. And thus the question is whether these virtual communities are able to confront and challenge relations of domination. It is, I think, precisely by posing the political problem of reconfiguration of the body within the algorithm fixation of sexual and gender identities and hierarchies that the feminist perspective, from its partiality critique of algorithmic society, can, going back to Shulamit Firestone, shakes its foundation and produce a critique not only of women's position in the algorithm, but of technology as a whole. Thank you.